In this video, we're going to go through the Introduction to Statistics for our application course, SL. So first thing, we're going to go through some vocabulary because the IB uses this vocabulary in questions, so we just need to make sure that we understand what they mean. Data is going to be the information about specific characteristics of a group of individuals. Data will be something that we are investigating. We have two types of variables that we're going to be looking at, qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative describes particular characteristics. So qualitative variable could be something where you answer and the answer is a word. Quantitative is where your characteristic is described in numerical values. So your answer to quantitative questions would be a number. Next up, we have population. So population is where we talk about the entire collection of individuals about which we are drawing conclusions. Often, we're going to be looking not at the population, but at the sample. And I'm skipping one ahead. The sample is a group of individuals that are selected from a population. In the next slide, we're going to be talking about how to choose this sample because that's very important. Most of the time in this course, we're only going to be able to do a survey. A survey is where we ask questions to the sample and we collect this information. A census is something we're not going to be doing in this course because for a census, we would need to collect information from a whole population, and often we don't have access to the whole population. Now, like I said, in this course, we're going to be focusing on quantitative data. So that's a question that you're asking that has a numerical value. If the numerical value is a whole integer, then we're going to call this discrete data. And if the numerical value is a number that could fit in a range, so let's say from 2 to 4, well, this is going to be considered continuous data. And it's important to know the difference between the two because we're going to be calculating things slightly different depending on if it's discrete or continuous. Now, this is a very important slide. These are the 5 sampling methods that we are expected to know how to use in the IB. I'm going to start with the first one, which is simple random sampling technique. And this one is the most basic one where you are really using random process to choose people from a population. So there's no order, there's no thinking behind it, you're just randomly selecting. The next one I'm going to talk about is convenience sampling, and this is where you're choosing based on what is most convenient to you as the person conducting the survey. So if I would be in a classroom, I would choose the group of students who is the closest to me because that is the most convenient, the most easy for me. So the next one is systematic sampling. Now, systematic sampling is when there's a system in place for choosing your people. So often you'll hear something like a list of individuals are placed in alphabetical order, and I'm going to choose every third person. That would be systematic sampling. Now, the two last ones we have are fairly similar to each other. So we're going to try to understand the difference between these two. The first one is stratified sampling. Now, for this one, we're choosing a sample in a way that the proportion of each of certain characteristic matches the proportion of the population. Now, what does that mean? For example, if we place a whole population and we separate them in genders, we're going to have our genders. If we have a gender that has 6 people and another gender that has 9 people, well, we're going to pick the appropriate proportion. So that means we would have 2 people from this gender and 3 people from the other gender. So this is the stratified one. Proportion is important. The other one is choosing a sample that is only comprised of members of the population that fit certain characteristics. So for example, we're going to still separate our 2 groups, but we're not going to use proportion. We're going to choose 2 of one gender and 2 of the other gender, regardless of how they are separated, or where their proportion is. One of our main focus for this presentation is understanding the measures of central tendency, just a fancy way of talking about mean, medium, and mode, which I'm sure we know a lot about. Mean is another word for average, so this is where we're going to sum up all of our data and divide them by how many data points we have in total. Our mode is the data point that shows up the most often, and our median is always the middle number. Now, we're going to be using our calculators to calculate all of these in our next 3 examples. What's important to know about mean, median, mode for our application course is when do we want to use which one? So there are some properties to each of these, and this is where you can think about this as when you're advertising. When you're advertising, what would you like to promote? So for example, the mode is really useful because it's the most often value. One thing you need to realize that it only takes in consideration the one that's the most often. It doesn't take into consideration outliers or extreme values left and right. Mean, like we said, is another word for average. So this is the one that's most commonly used in all of our advertisement, even though it doesn't always make sense. It takes all the values into account, and it's really affected by those outliers. So if we have an outlier or extreme values, the mean is going to be changed a lot from it. And our last one is our median. So our median gives us the halfway point, but it only takes middle values into account. And it doesn't really get affected by extreme values because normally there's only 1 or 2 of those, and that doesn't affect where the middle is often. Now let's do examples where we're going to be talking about calculating the mean, median, mode using our calculator. So make sure you have your GDC for the next part of this video. The first example we're going to be doing is calculating the mean, median, mode for a list of data. So first thing, we need to enter our data in our list. So we're going to go into stats. We're going to edit our list. So that's the first option, number 1, or enter. Right here, we see that there's already some numbers, probably from existing problems. So we need to delete that. In order to delete that, you're going to go on where it's written L1 and L2 separately. So the up arrow, and you're going to click clear and then enter. You're going to do the same thing for your L1, clear, enter. 4, 5, 6, 6, 6, 7, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Make sure that you click enter to the very last number that you have. Now we're going to ask the calculator to calculate everything for us. So we're going to go back on stats, and this time you're going to move to the right and you're going to calculate. We have only one variable, so we're going to do one variable. We have one list. Now our list is in the L1 column. The frequency list, we don't have a frequency list for this problem, so you're going to go ahead and delete the frequency list. And you're going to put your cursor on calculate and click enter. On this page, you're going to see many information. The relevant information for us is the very first one. So X bar means the mean. Then when you scroll down, the next one that's going to be interesting for us is this symbol here, which we'll talk about in next class, standard deviation. And then when you go down to this list, you're going to see all the information you need to build your box and whisker, which we'll talk about next class. But one of the information here is your median, so 6.5. The second example we're going to do is calculating the mean, median, mode, this time for, again, discrete data. However, we have a frequency list. The frequency list tells us how many we have of each of the data. So looking at this list, we have 10 people who said that there are 0 children in their family, 25 people who said there's 1 child in their family, and so on and so forth. Okay, so now we have a list of data. It's still one variable, but we have a frequency list. So we're going to go ahead and put in the data into one list and then the frequency in the second list. So again, we're going to start with stats, edit. We need to delete what's already there, so arrow up. clear, and enter. We're going to put the data list in the first one and the frequency list in the second one. So go ahead and do that and pause the video. Now that all your data is in, we're going to go and ask the calculator to calculate our central tendency. So we're going to go back to stats, calculate. We're still dealing with a one variable statistics. Our data was in list 1, and now our frequency is in list 2. So in order to have L2 here, notice on your screen where you have the numbers. So number 1, just above it in blue is L1, number 2, just above it is L2. So since it's in blue, that means we're going to need to do second 2, and now we're going to have our list 2, which is our frequency. We're going to go down and calculate. Again, the same display as our previous question. Our mean is 1.91, and then as we scroll down, we're going to see our median is 2. And our last example is going to be looking at calculating mean, median, mode for continuous data. Continuous data is grouped together. So we have from 0 to 5 hours spent watching TV, and we're told that 5 people fit that category. So we have continuous data and our frequency list. It's going to be the same process to enter the data in the calculator. However, this time, when you're entering the data points, you're always going to enter the midpoint of the category. So the midpoint of the category is what you're going to put in your L1, and then your L2 is going to be the frequency. So same steps as before, stats, we're going to edit, we're going to delete what is already in our lists, and now you can pause the video and put in your data. Once the data is in, then we're going to go through the same steps, stats, calculate, we still have one variable. Our data was in list 1 and our frequency is in list 2. So we're going to go ahead and click calculate. And now you have the same information, your mean, and then when you scroll down, you have your median here. Just realize that your median falls as 12.5. So that means 12.5 is a category from 10 to 15. So we would say that the median class is the class from 10 to 15.